Okay, I think we are good to go now. Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you from wherever you are connecting with us. And I welcome you on behalf of SEED, which is the Students Education, Empowerment and Development in Mental Health Group, uh, in association with Association for Community Mental Health Promotion based in Turkey, and in collaboration with the PMPC section of WPA. This is our sixth intergenerational meeting where senior mental health educators they meet the medical students. And today we have chosen a topic that probably deserves more focus than we usually talk about, especially with our medical students and the undergraduates. And the theme of today's session is substance use. If you would have been through the flyers of our event, you would have seen that we have a few student speakers, in fact, the lead speakers for the session, as we have the format for our sessions. We have three of them with us, and we hope the fourth one will also join with us and during the course of the time. Besides, we have two very senior experts with us, Dr. Bulent and Dr. Dave. In fact, I must mention that before we started this session, Dave kind of highlighted that how in United States, substance use has become a key issue, even during the undergrad training and education. And the situation is probably the same in different parts of the world. So I won't take much of your time now, and let's hear from those from where it matters the most. So let me quickly invite our student speakers to kindly share their thoughts on this theme when it comes to substance use, and particularly in context of your training, when you talk of training in psychiatry. What is it that you think about this issue? What is it that it brings to your mind? What is your perspective on how we approach this issue in our teaching and curriculum? And what would be your kind of suggestions or even recommendations? So please feel free to share your heart out. Whatever you think is relevant will be relevant for this group. And then I'll invite our experts to kind of share their views on this thing. So let's begin with the first student, and let me invite Yasmin. Yasmin, would you be the first one to go?
Yeah. Should I start with the first question?
Sure.
Should I read the question out first, or?
You just share your thoughts. We know
Oh, okay. Yeah. So personally, I am only a third med. Like I'm in my third year of medical school. And in the syllabus that I am in Galway, I'm in National University of Ireland in Galway. In the syllabus in my university, we do psychiatry posting in fourth year, and I haven't not actually officially gone yet into my psych posting. And I've spoken about this to Rodrigo as well, but he was saying how it'd be useful to have a pre-posting kind of perspective as well. So obviously my answers are going to be tailored to, it's going to be pretty limited, I think, to just because I just haven't experienced the full kind of psych posting yet.
So you are to speak about your perspective before you went for the posting.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Please.
Right. So as of right now, my perception on addiction is that it is like a medical illness. You know, it's, in my opinion, it's a pathological illness, just like any other illness that requires its own specific treatment or management, something that needs to be cured. And I think this perception only like developed kind of in recent years that I've gone into, like I've delved into medical school and I've actually been around illnesses. But I think throughout growing up, I may have had other misconceptions about addictions, just because even though now I know that it's it's pathological, before it's like anything to do with psychiatry, like psychiatric illnesses, it's a bit more abstract. It's a bit more harder to understand, just because you can't really see when someone's sick, like not in the conventional sense. So in that way, I think those were my misconceptions on addiction, like before going to medical school and learning about what illnesses really are. I guess before it was easier to kind of blame it on personal choice, or why did they not stop thinking it's as simple as a personal choice, but even though it's a lot more complex and a lot more delicate than that. That's
Yes, if I may ask you, usually when we interact with medical students, and in context of mental disorders, there are already so many misconceptions that are going on. For example, schizophrenia, depressive disorders. So in your opinion, these misconceptions in context of substance use vis-a-vis, say, schizophrenia or major depressive disorder, are they similar, or would you say that they are even qualitatively different, so to say?
I think in some ways they are similar in a way that we just don't understand too much about it yet. So it's easy to reduce the problem or minimize the issue when essentially it's actually something just as big as any other disease in medicine, but just because of, I think, learning about psychiatric diseases as well, it's something that's new and something that's still being incorporated into the syllabus as the years are going by now. So it's just that awareness is slowly building up, but it's getting there, but I don't think it's at the same height of kind of awareness as, for example, other diseases. So yeah, in some ways I do think it might be kind of similar. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. Kevin and Rosda, would you have any views on this particular issue, misconceptions that students they tend to have before they actually see the patients or they attend the sessions on substance use? Any thoughts from either one of you if you would like to say?
I can talk a bit.
Yeah, sure.
Now I am at my 6th year at medical school. So yeah, I had my psychiatry posting already. So yeah, it was something different for me after having this posting. My conception changed because I can say before having this internship, of course, I was a part of this community in general, this population of normal people. I was coming from there. Of course, I was against substance use, but I was saying, okay, it can be a result of environmental factors. And yeah, there were many things more than personal. But of course, I was saying, yes, you can quit yourself, this substance use. You can stop it. And it is something, if you really decide, you can do it. But after having this posting, I learned that it was more than this, because there were also some predisposition factors that I saw. And there was some personal differences. So it is not easy for each of them to easily quit, for example. So there were many things like, for example, when we quit and years later, when you have the second use, then you will say, okay, I will start again. And I feel this eager and need this urge very much because of this molecular changes in our brain. But before it was like, yeah, you can just quit. You can just get some help. It is really easy. Why don't you do that? So we were saying like this, but of course, yeah, after having this posting, my conception really changed. Learning about all this predisposition changes in brain and to see them.
Okay. Thank you so much. Kevin, like Rosda mentioned that there is this role of social factors. And when we come to talk about psychiatric disorders, there is this interplay of biological factors, psychological issues, and even the environmental factors. So would you like to comment on, like in context of the clinical teaching that you have had, would you have adequate exposure to all these determinants that would have contributed towards addictions and substance use? Do you think the curriculum is kind of talking about these relevant themes, or are there any lacunae that you see that needs to be filled in? Kevin, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To answer that question, yeah. Okay, so for me, right, I'm from University Malaysia of Sabah. So Sabah is basically one of the more rural area of the Malaysia. So what I see is whenever I see a patient, then what they explain to me is that most of the patient that I met in this thing is their background is a bit poor, where they have a low education, where they have low economic status. This I think really contribute to that, and mostly more of that is their peer status, their peer pressure, where actually one of the big challenge for me, for actually this patient to actually to be cured is peer pressure, because whenever they have rehab, what I know is whenever they have rehab, they really want to change. But for me, they couldn't, not they don't want. It's just, I think there's no any post-rehab treatment. Do I say, like, for example, they couldn't, whenever they will meet back their previous friends, like usually drug addict, they will mingle around with drug addicts, right? So for me, so whenever after their rehab, they will mingle back with the drug addicts, and which bring back them to the drug addicts. That this keep cycle going on and going on. So for me, I think this is a very this determinant is really very important, and I think it's a very, very big challenge for us to actually solve this issue.
Okay, thank you so much, Kevin. So Yasmin, if I get back to you again, see, we always talk about the importance of policy-related issues whenever it comes to substance use. Things like availability, things like free access to certain substances. And I believe you would have all heard about this dialogue going around making certain substances legal. For example, marijuana. There is a lot of debate that goes on around that topic. And I must confess, it's not easy to give answers. What is the right way to go about it, or what is wrong?
Yeah.
When you guys read about substance use in your curriculum and as part of your medical education, do you think these policy-related issues, you are exposed to these issues? And would you have any opinions on this particular aspect, how policy and governance-related issues can impact substance use, and what's their place in your curriculum, in your experience?
For my experience thus far, I expect, like, when I go into fourth year, there's an entire kind of rundown on addiction that's going to be discussed, because I think in the context of Ireland, where I'm studying, addiction is a huge issue as well. So because of that, the relevancy kind of requires some sort of discussion in the medical schools. But for right now, for third med, I don't have my psychiatry classes yet, but like we have this thing called public health. Like we have a module on public health, and that's where we do discuss like social determinants of health, and also some of the policies that have been in place to reduce harm, in terms of addiction problems. But I guess it's all more targeted towards specific addictions more than others. In Ireland, there's I guess the most significant addiction problem will be alcohol excess, just because it's more ingrained in the culture compared to other cultures, I think. So it's just a problem that the government has been wanting to tackle for a long time. And they've been implementing policies and also education-wise and everything. So there are a lot of, I guess, strategies being put in place in the past 20 years. And then the strategies have changed and been adapted in the coming years to see what works and what hasn't. And not everything has been successful. But some things have stuck. Like now, for example, in Ireland, we have this thing called minimum unit MUP, minimum unit pricing. So every single unit of alcohol is sort of price matched to a certain price, and this is like to tackle chronic alcoholics, just so they would kind of gravitate towards lesser prices, lesser units of alcohol. And there's so many other kind of strategies being put in place as well, in terms of tackling the addictions. But when you ask me about legalization of marijuana and everything, I feel like I read about it like globally, of course, but it's just, I think in the context of Ireland, I don't think it's as much of a big problem. I guess it's more, it differs from place to place, but every single, I get the gist of it. I mean, I think public policies have a great influence on the progress, or the progress of the progress of the addiction journey for like a country, for example. I think it has a lot, because public policies, the government has a lot of power and authority to be able to intervene or provide intervention on like large scale, like it would reach like a lot of people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And in fact, I'll go a step beyond this and would say that I personally believe that medical students, their own personal views and their approach and attitude towards substances, it also is kind of shaped by the news that they read about these policy changes, I believe. So Ross, can I invite you to kind of share your thoughts from Turkey? Do you think medical students, they get adequate exposure to these issues, and how these influences their own personal attitudes and views?
Well, yeah, this is, how can I say, medical students are exposed more in a way than the community itself, but at the same time, are we really gaining the awareness? This is a question. For example, we are working to really much about quitting smoking, especially not alcohol, I guess. About smoke, we are doing many things. Like we are especially doing it with our public health department, more than psychiatry, I guess, because I heard more about helping the quit, stop using the substances in psychiatry department. But in terms of preventive medicine, we are doing more about it during public health posting. We say, we need to understand how many of us using this, and what are the predisposition factors, and what are our risks. And at the same time, as we are aware of it, we don't really do it ourselves, because I see more and more students, medical students, are getting addicted. I can see that because this is something related to stress, something like you are exposed by others. You can see that other medical students are also using more and more. And stress really triggers, and you don't really say, okay, I'm a medical student, I should not do it myself. But I can see that it is rising again, because the problems of society in Turkey, as we are having some public problems like economic crisis and many things, then it became a problem again, even among us.
So that's a very interesting comment that you made, that even here in India, if I would share, the perspective that many medical students share, especially in terms of certain recreational substances, which they believe are not as harmful as certain so-called hard drugs, they usually refer to these media reports and these policy-related debates that See, there is something called as medical marijuana. Then there are some countries which are legalizing cannabis. So there must be a change in the stance of policymakers. But many a times, personally, I think that the point where they are coming, they might not be fully aware of what the substances can do, not just in terms of the damage they can cause, but in terms of the lifestyle changes they can bring along in your life. So that is one area that I think we need to have more discussion, and maybe we need to focus more on those themes. Let me invite Kevin once again. Do you think, Kevin, situation is similar there where you are studying, or there are, yeah, Bulan, please.
Excuse me. Due to the time changes, daylight changes, there has been some problem beginning. I'm very sorry about that. And Rodrigo is with us, as you see. Before going to Kevin, would you like to pass over?
Sure.
Rodrigo?
So, yeah, thank you, Bulan. So Rodrigo is here with us. So may I request you, Rodrigo, to take us through the rest of the session? Thank you so much.
Oh, no, I wouldn't want to interrupt the sequence. I know that, but before passing the mic to you, Kevin, and thank you very much, Dr. Jatan, for taking over moderation. And as I understand, you have been discussing misconceptions around etiology, misconceptions, and whether or not there is a discussion around policies and in the wider context and the role that it might play in addiction when teaching about psychiatry in med school and on a psychiatry posting afterwards, and if there is a correction of misconceptions potentially that we carry from society ourselves. But I wouldn't want to interrupt. Kevin, you were going to discuss the question that Dr. Jatan posed about policies and in the broader context.
So for in Malaysia policy that Malaysia did is, I think for me, their penalty is really harsh, that they give a death penalty. So I think that's why there's in our medical school, this is not a common topic. So we didn't really discuss much about that. And we only learn this about whenever we read in the news, or that's the only thing we have the info. We didn't really touch much about this. I think I can't really give much insight on this policy. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. On the contrary, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because that speaks about something that we need to keep in mind when med students are going through the School of Medicine. I understand we focus, because there is little time to cover a lot of content. So we focus on clinical presentation and understanding individual treatment as well. We're focusing on individuals. So it's important for medical schools to keep in mind that people who might end up as policymakers or as advisors for policymakers are going through med school as well. So it is important from start for them to have a glimpse of these concepts, of these issues. So it speaks volumes. So thank you very much. I guess having discussed etiology and misconceptions and policies and whether or not there is a discussion about policies, I would love to move the conversation a little bit towards caring and providing treatment to someone with an addiction. And my question is going to be a very broad one. And it's going to start, the idea is, as you know, to gather your understandings pre having gone through psychiatry about what it is to provide care to someone that has an addiction. What are the challenges of providing care to someone that has an addiction? And having afterwards gone through psychiatry, those of you who have had that opportunity, did any of the thoughts that you had change, and in which way they changed? But let's start perhaps first, although it would be best to combine the answer perhaps. So what were your thoughts about providing treatment to someone with an addiction, if you had any, and the challenges potentially before psychiatry, and once you've gone through psychiatry, if that changed and how. Could we follow the same order perhaps? Yasmin, would you be so kindly to answer the question? Yeah.
I think the caring and treatment of people with addiction is a very difficult and expensive process, especially, you know, in terms of the hospital and everything. And I can, for example, in my syllabus here, just because of the burden of alcohol access, alcohol addiction in the country, it's something that is heavily reiterated in our syllabus time and time again. We're always getting educated regarding this issue, regarding like, oh, how much health costs has been budgeted or kind of been set aside specifically just for the burden of alcohol addiction in terms of the hospitals in the country. And I say it's very difficult because I don't know enough about obviously treatment of psychiatric, you know, like addictions and stuff, because I haven't properly been trained in that area yet. But from what I know, it's a very long process of addiction is often a cycle that's very hard to break. And so it's a very long process, one, and sometimes it's the entire expenses that cover that long process could also be spent to no avail, because, you know, it's a cycle. There's no beginning or end. It's sometimes it depends entirely on the collaboration with the collaboration and the patient's compliance to the specific treatment process. And I think that's another reason why I think it's difficult, because every disease, obviously, once you get medicated there, you require a very tight or a very specific patient compliance to the medication in order for the cure to work and the medication to work. But especially so, I think, for psychiatry problems and addiction problems especially, you just require a higher effort and a very, very high amount of discipline coming from the perspective of the patients themselves. And this is hard to control, because how do you like control a patient's willingness to, you know, it's very hard to control because it's a very unpredictable factors, and a lot of things, I think a lot of things could affect it in the process. The socioeconomic factors, support, whether or not they have the right support, familial support, whether or not they even really, really want to change, whether or not they have peer pressure issues. So there are a lot of things that could keep them in this vicious cycle. And it's also expensive as well, I think, the treatment of addiction problems. Just for example, in Ireland, for alcohol-related injuries and disease, there's a huge budget allocated just for that, just because it's such a problem. Every single night people come to the ED for these reasons, and not to mention the long-term effects and the long-term medical conditions, medical problems that could come as a domino effect as to, you know, just the addiction themselves. So it's not a problem that just stops there. It's a continuous kind of I think it's just a huge health cost, and it's very hard. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Rojda? Am I saying that right? Please correct me.
Rojda.
Rojda, please.
For me, about caring and treatment for these patients, I learned that these patients are more, they feel like they are not understood because they are addicted. They say, I cannot just quit. I cannot just stop using this drug. And other people who wants to help me, really, they don't understand me, they say. and they are not searching for help in a way. Sometimes they search for help, but they say, okay, but I don't believe you because you are not a user. So I don't know if you can really help me. But when we start talking to them, we say, okay, maybe you were judged by other people. You were blamed that you were using this drug, and you came here and maybe you were said like alcoholic and or something else, like you were judged with these discriminative words. But here we understand you. We understand that there are some molecular changes which cause this urge in you. Here we understand it, and we are trying to help you in this way. We will try to help you by giving some medications, giving some maybe group therapies, or making you understand others' experiences to see them, how could they deal with it. So it was really, if we really get in contact with these people, then yeah, it is something else, because sometimes they really search, they really try to find help, but in some other cases, they are just coming because their relatives or their daughters, their wives are pushing them to come there, saying, oh, you need to stop it because it also affects us in a way. But people around them, mostly they look selfish to them because they cannot quit. But they say, okay, you are finishing our marriage, for example, they say. Yeah, it is something different. So we, first of all, we try to make them understand that we understand them. And later, we are trying to help them in this way. And it was really enlightening for me, because I learned, yeah, we can help these people, showing them we understand them. Of course, there are some public service broadcasting all the time. They are putting some, I don't know, public policies about them. We are trying to help them, but to show these people where this is coming from, how we can do it together, it was something different, and it was really helping, I guess. So yeah, it was a new light for me.
Excellent, thank you. And how was that, if I may ask, how was that different, if you were to remember, how was that different from what you used to think about it when you were going through med school before having that experience in your psychiatry posting?
As I told before, I was always against substance use. Of course, I was saying, yeah, you should quit because it is not healthy. I was saying that, but I felt like these people are not really listening to me, because yeah, I didn't feel they understand. Yeah, they don't see me as an understanding person. But later, I was also not, yeah, for me too, it was just easy to say, just quit it, because it is your choice. I was saying the same thing because I have my own experience with my father. When I was a child, he saw that I was trying to do like him. For example, I was putting a paper, I was rounding it like a smoke. So he said, okay, I need to quit because this girl is starting doing the same thing. But my father was a good example, because he really, he was determined to do it, and he could do it. Now, always he is saying, it is in your head, you should stop it, and you can do it yourself. We are saying like this to everybody, but they say, yeah, I know it is in my head, but I cannot I don't feel like it. So I saw that, yeah, I was thinking like my father before. I was saying, yeah, this is in our hands. This is in our brain. We can do it. But later having this posting, I saw how difficult it could be with personal predisposition factors. So I was understanding more, I guess.
Thank you. And Kevin, what was your experience thinking about providing care or for someone who had an addiction while going through med school, and if it changed, and in which way it changed once you went through psychiatry?
Okay, so for me, I'm almost the same with Rosa. For my parents is actually speaking as well in the past. So for me, I think it's in the previous, before when I actually went through psychiatry posting, I thought it's your own will, your choice whether you really want to change or not, your own, to whether you want to stop taking this drug or substance. For example, my parents, when she's smoking and young, I'm really fed up with her. Then actually one time I actually ate a cigarette, that shocked my parents. So she really did stop after that. So she really tried her best, but then after that, she really stopped. Yeah, she really did stop. She really, even when her friend asked her for a smoke, she really stopped. So I think before the psychiatry posting, I think it's their own will whether you really want to stop. But after when I went through the psychiatry posting, I learned more about it. It's not whether it's your will or not, because this substance actually changes your brain molecular some things, and they also for example, your substance withdrawal symptom. I think we take it too lightly. I think it's really a very big symptom as well. And as I mentioned earlier, that why I really this treatment really didn't work in Sabah, especially in Malaysia, where I'm currently in. It's a rural area part of Malaysia. So most of the patients here is a low education, and they have a very low income status. And for me during that time, because when I actually went to the mental hospital, the patient is mostly very chronic, means they went in and out of the hospital multiple times. And one of the way the treatment they give them is they educate them. But the problem is they grow up with drug addicts. So drug addict usually mingles with drug addicts. So whenever they out of the rehab or after they are discharged, then they will, it's not they don't want to change, it's just they mingle back with their friends and they start going back. I think it's more of the peer pressure and the cycle, and really difficult to break this cycle. So I'm really, because it's a long process. So if a single moment, then you go back to the drug addict again. That's a really, really difficult for me as a medical student when I see this. Yeah, one single small moment, then you are already pushed in the drug addict again. You are going back into this again. Yeah, so I think it's really difficult after I went through this psychiatry posting.
I understand. Thank you very much. Just to welcome Doris. Hi, Doris. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. I'm very sorry for getting the time wrong. Forgot to count the daylight savings.
Both of us. Yes. Just to put you up to date, we have Dr. Jatan took over at the start, and he was discussing with Jasmine, Roshda, and Kevin etiology of addiction and misconceptions around that, then also policies and whether or not in med school, while we're going through med school, there is a discussion about that and its potential role in making it easier or harder to develop an addiction. And we were just now talking about, and perhaps actually, sorry to put you on the spot, but the question I was just asking Jasmine, Roshda, and Kevin was caring or providing treatment to someone that has an addiction. And the question was, what were your thoughts around the challenges or what it is like to provide treatment to someone that has, or care to someone that has an addiction? And if that changed, and in which way it changed once you went through psychiatry?
Sure, thank you for that question. Before I started my psychiatry placement, actually during my preclinical years, we'd actually been taught about the wheel of change. So talking about at which stage the patient would be at, where they might be thinking about change, or maybe they're not thinking about it, whether they've tried changing. And I think since starting the placement, it's really drove it home that unless the patient themselves wants to make a change, there's not much that people around them can really do. The most that we can do is to support them, and all the other interventions, biopsychosocial, all revolve around the patient. So in the end, engagement, I think, is probably the biggest challenge to do with that. Yeah.
Okay. So that was already part of med school, the idea of the will of change. And there are some people that are, is the concept of will of change something that you are familiar with, Jasmine, Gosha, Kevin? Oh, it's also the trans-theoretical model of change, this idea that one goes through stages. It's a theory around how someone changes one's behavior intentionally. And the theory tries to explain the process that one goes through, and it presents this notion of stages. There are stages in the wheel of change. As in around wheel in a car. I'm saying that because I know it probably sounds like I will when I say will, because yes, accent. Anyways. So the idea is that someone starts with a preparation stage or a pre-contemplative stage when you are not even thinking or contemplating change. And then you contemplate it, then you prepare for it, and then you act, and then you try to maintain the change. So someone who is in a pre-contemplative stage, someone who's not thinking about change, and if you provide tools for action to that person, then there is a mismatch between the stage in which the person is and the intervention that you're using. So that because of that mismatch, then it won't fall on fertile ground, so to speak. And the best thing that one can do potentially for someone who's pre-contemplating is try to move this person towards the next stage, which is to contemplate change. So provide some flyers with information and things like that to try to match the stage. So that's what the theory proposes. And thank you all for your answers. And I realized that there was also this implicit assumption in my question, and I want to elaborate it a little bit more. The implicit assumption was, how do we care for someone who has an addiction? So the implied image here was someone who had already developed an addiction, someone who has repeatedly engaged in substance use and now meets the criteria for addiction. But during med school or potentially afterwards in psychiatry, is there a conversation about providing treatment to someone who is using substance in a hazardous way or in a potentially harmful way, but not yet meets the criteria for addiction? This person is drinking and driving, for instance, so they have had an accident because they were drinking and they were driving, but they wouldn't meet the criteria for addiction. Is there a conversation about providing treatment to someone who has this harmful relationship with substances, but they're not meeting the criteria for addiction? Jasmine?
So what I'm understanding is there any kind of discussion on the treatments of people who have not yet met the criteria for addiction per se, but are on the path towards that? Is that it?
Or potentially, but I'm thinking here, I'm thinking here about this image. It's the image that I have in mind. One is a GP and someone comes through the service because they have an infection potentially. And because it's part of the assessment, you check substance use, and they talk about drinking in a harmful way, or they are starting to smoke potentially. And is there a discussion about, even though they might not meet the criteria for addiction, one should still make a point about how's your drinking, and when do you drink, and you assess it, even though the person came for something else, or they're not really going for an addiction, you still assess substance use, and you see if there is something that can be done to prevent harm.
Definitely. I think in any case where substance abuse has been used, has been misused or used in a harmful way, regardless of whether the patient meets the criteria of per se addiction or not, I think it's always a good thing to be able to discuss through it, or at least ask more regarding the issue, regarding the status of whatever that the state, ask more regarding that specific area per se as well. And even during consultations and stuff, during consultations and meeting up with patients, it's always something that we do go over, and it's something that is heavily like our counselors and everyone, like our mentors always say, like, don't forget to like ask about these things as well, just because of the, like you said, like it's a very preventative, I guess, measure as well, even though they're not necessarily addicted, but if it's used in a harmful way, then it should merit some sort of discussion, I think. Yeah. It's still equally as important. I feel like it would be more important to prevent. It would do a lot more like long-term benefit than, curing when you have the problem itself. So yes.
Thanks. Rosa, was that your experience as well?
Well, I can say that while we are history taking from all patients, as now I'm practically working in the hospital, I can say while we take the history of patients in terms of any diseases, we also question if they use alcohol or if they smoke. We ask these questions, but I don't know if we really act when we get the answer yes. Because we just put something like, yeah, he uses this package here, smoke or cigarettes, and he's an alcohol addict, maybe we say. But in general, in psychiatric issues, I guess the awareness among other departments, other domains of medicine is not really high still. I can say, yes, even, if this is a psychiatric issue, especially when the doctor itself or himself, if he is smoking, he doesn't really even say you should quit smoking. They don't say it. They don't offer this, or they don't send this person to, search for help. They don't say it really. And this is a problem, I guess. Yeah, we don't really question other substances except for cigarettes and tobacco in general and alcohol. I don't say, yeah, if we are suspicious of something is going wrong in the behavior of this patient, then we can question, of course. But yeah, after having this yes answer, I don't know, we should act more as a preventive way of preventive medicine. We should act more. And I do really care for myself. If I don't choose to be a psychiatrist, I would probably work on it. I would say, yes, I should say these people, I should make them go somewhere to find help at least, because it is harmful and it is a problem of society. I can see this is not something just personal. It is also affecting who are around of this person. And yeah, many things are going wrong, but they are not aware. I would say, yes, are you aware? You are not a real addict, maybe. We can say you are not, you are not in the criteria. We cannot define you as a person, addict person right now, but maybe the criteria will change in the future. I don't know, but you need to find help to quit this because it is not helping you. You can see.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Kevin.
I think this issue, maybe we can talk about harm reduction program. Actually, the reduce the harm that the patient actually harm the environment or their family member. Because what I see among the patient that in the hospital is that whenever they was actually, most of them is not willingly they went to the hospital by themselves. They were actually caught by police because they did a violent crime or they did something. So maybe for us, what we can do is maybe we can do a harm reduction program where maybe they are not defined as addiction, but we can, for me, what I understand about harm reduction program is maybe we can actually ask the patient, harm reduction program for me is like, you can take a substance in a safe environment, yeah. So you wouldn't harm other people maybe, yeah, and the environment, yeah. That's what I think.
Thanks. And Doris, what's your experience?
Yeah, I'm actually quite similar to Roger in the sense that we're told that for the patient's holistic health, we should screen for, substance use. You should always screen for alcohol use, smoking. And for me, I think part of that is also screening for their perspective on it, because the more that you ask a patient about, what do you think about your smoking or your alcohol, it kind of makes them think about it over time. So you might find that at a later consultation, they might be a bit more open to things like nicotine replacement therapy or maybe cutting down. So I think there's that aspect to it also. Another thing was that I think in psychiatry especially, it's important for clinicians to not be caught up with labels or diagnosis, and it should be more about treating the patient. So less so whether they perfectly meet a criteria for disease, and more so around, how is this drug use or alcohol use affecting them and whether they want to cut down on it or not, and how we can help them to do that.
Excellent, thanks. So, and that's exactly spot on. That both we were talking about prevention and the importance of reducing harm and acknowledging the person's relationship with the substance when trying to provide care for someone who is using substance and might be harming themselves or harming others. And I think this is again an important conceptual issue, so to speak, because the word addiction, and this is probably a discussion that was had before, but the word addiction evokes, most of the time, it evokes this idea of someone who has, and I'm thinking here about media and movies and TV series, someone who has a very severe relationship with an illegal substance, and they are living in very hardship conditions and potentially experiencing homelessness, etc., etc. But there is a whole degree of harmful relationships with all dangerous consumptions. And as we are all noticing, perhaps the majority of the population lies, if we think about it in the shape of a triangle, and we put the percentage of people that have that very severe relationship with the substance at the top of the pyramid, then the majority of the population lies at the base. They don't have an addictive relationship with the substance. They use it occasionally if they use it, but still, because the number of people who are doing this is so large, the potential for harm is also, if we scale it, it lies there. There is, and I'm talking here about drinking and driving, and I'm talking here about smoking, potentially alcohol and tobacco, the two most harmful substances, because of this widespread and the associated harms that we know they have. So, and absolutely, this harm reduction, the idea of reducing harm, reducing the harm caused by the substances, not necessarily trying to, and I'm sorry for falling into like a pedagogical monologue type of thing. I would love to hear actually for the people that know more about this. But we would love to, I was saying, harm reduction is not necessarily about pushing abstinence, or it is about checking that relationship, if we think about it, the person has with the substance, the harm that it is causing. How can we make sure that how can we help to reduce that harm? And this applies to all types of substances, from illegal to legal as well. But yes, we have covered a lot of ground, I think. We have talked about etiology, policies, social determinants of health, treatment and care. And thank you very much for your thoughts. I think a few things before, yeah, I should just pass the mic, because there are two more experienced people here that I would love to hear actually more about than myself. Professor Barron, do you mind sharing us your thoughts? With us, your thoughts?
Sure. In fact, I want to, so it's very late my time, so it's 1 a.m., but I have just 3 quick questions I would love to hear from our students. I want to thank them for taking time from their very busy schedules and rotations and posts and studying. The first, and very quick questions. The first question,
oh, that's unfortunate. We might give Professor Barron a few minutes. Is it? Can you? It is not my connection. It's okay. Thanks. I was just checking, but yeah, let's give Professor Barron a few minutes. Professor Kosken.
Thank you, Rodrigo. I'm very sorry about the time issue.
Yeah.
Well, here comes Dave.
Oh, real quick. Anybody interested in going into addiction? Because, you know, the other addictions we didn't talk about are sex addiction, internet addiction. You know, we talk about alcohol and tobacco, but, and again, I follow the global literature as Professor Boulant does as well. What we see in your generation are oftentimes other things that can be addictive. And the last thing that's most important to me is, how do you feel as students we should be teaching this better? How can you help us understand? Do you want to just see the facts on how many people die of drunk driving or overdose? Overdose death is a huge issue in the United States. Since COVID, it's the highest it's ever been. So I would love to hear from our students to educate me and Boulant and some of our other more senior peoples. Boulant and I have been doing this for 40 years now, but how could we teach it better from your perspective as the consumer, as the student? What would make it more relevant for you? And then for you to teach your patients and your colleagues who maybe don't have an interest in this. I'll stop there.
Just to recap, I think, because unfortunately we lost the connection when you were posing the first question. We heard that you were talking about the importance of behavioral addiction and how to teach better, but you mentioned there were 3 questions. The first one was?
Oh, the first one was how do they feel about looking at addiction from a chronic disease model, like diabetes, type 2 diabetes, obesity. I think the problem that, and I'd love to hear the perspective of the students, is it's very tough to get around the prejudice, the drunk person who shows up in the emergency room, this is the 5th time you've been in for a motor vehicle accident. So there's a lot of negative feelings that people get, why don't you just stop using? I can stop using, why don't you? So I'd love to hear the students' perspective. Does it make sense from your generation, from your perspective as our future leaders in the field, about looking at addiction in whatever form as a chronic disease model, like type 2 diabetes, like chronic low back pain? There's a whole host of things, because I think people have a little less prejudice towards the classic chronic disease. People don't usually have a prejudice against someone who's got type 2 diabetes yet, or even type 1. I mean, we don't cure type 1 diabetes. We're better at treating it, but it's a chronic disease. You're on insulin forever. So I just wonder if the students feel like that helps in any way to help the patient understand it, to help the family understand it, and equally importantly, to help our colleagues understand that these are chronic diseases, not just saying it, but say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, my chronic diabetics, they've been diabetic for 25 to 30 years, or MS. I mean, there are other chronic diseases. So I'd love to hear the student's perspective. And it kind of ties into my last question is, what's the best way to tell us how we can teach it better so that when you're giving lectures in your career, you say, well, this is a much more effective way of teaching about this. And I love the comment that was made about, about not putting a label, but looking at quality of life, that using alcohol or drugs or psilocybin, the many, fentanyl, which is a big drug of, overdose and death in the United States. But how do we as physicians stay committed to our goal of helping a patient in the way they think, feel, and behave, their quality of life, and look at addiction as something that by definition is taking away from the quality of life?
I could answer first. Okay. All right. I think for the chronic disease model suggestion, I feel like that would actually take away a lot of the prejudice to do with, addiction if and when addiction is put under the chronic disease model, just because then it would kind of put addiction on the same height of importance and of very relevant and very concerning, pathological condition as the other chronic diseases, like you said, like back pain, like diabetes. People would just be able to see on the same level, like, oh, these things are the same things, and these things require the same level of care and the same level of patience and long-term treatment, and it's just as important and just as significant to look at as other things. And I think that would actually help with taking away the prejudice from that, because now obviously with substance abuse there's a huge negative connotation around it that we try to look past it, but it's so ingrained in our society, like Rajda mentioned. So it's so ingrained in our society that it's very hard to break away from that, especially if you're not exposed to the right information, or you're not exposed to the environment, like in the clinical environment. I guess it's a lot easier for us to be able to understand this. But for people in general, it's obviously when you see substance abuse, the first thing you're going to think is like, oh, like that's why did they misuse it in the first place? It's those kinds of questions that come to the forefront of our mind, like firstly, right? So for chronic disease model, that would be what I think. And for you also mentioned, I think what methods could be better to educate the students nowadays regarding addiction and how it helped better. I think the problem with, I can only speak for myself, but my problem with understanding is that I'm just not exposed to it as much, I think. And even in our syllabus, there is a syllabus on mental health issues, and there's syllabus on public health and how, like alcoholism or tobacco impacts like the larger scale of our community, but there isn't enough emphasis put on it as the rest of other diseases. And because of this, it just remains a side note, a small thing, I think, irrespective. In fact, when instead these things are actually very huge and affects like a lot more people than, let's say, even like smaller diseases, right? Like these things are very prevalent, I think, more prevalent, and should be discussed more. So I think the visibility and the giving a basic understanding of these patients as well, I think being more exposed to addicts and stuff would help us understand and get away the prejudice and like the fear of the unknown. Really, we just don't know what it is really. Like, for speaking as a third med, I don't really know much about addicts and stuff like that, and because of that, it just doesn't prompt further discussion, because it's not in our immediate, we can't, it's not in our realm of kind of what we see most it's not what's emphasized really. So I guess more exposure to the patients especially would aid better in our understanding of the pathology of the disease and understanding that this is a heavier issue than how it's usually portrayed to be. Yeah, I think so.
Would you ever consider going into addiction psychiatry?
Addiction.
I don't even know if that's a big specialty. You know, in the U.S. you can do a fellowship. That's actually a growing specialty. But I'd love to hear from the students on is that something that even is available in the rest of the world?
I think it's available in Ireland. I think I definitely think there are some people who are very trained to be dealing with addiction, but it's very interesting. Yeah, I feel like especially what you said about behavioral addiction as well. There are so many different types of addictions nowadays. It doesn't really confine to those, you know, it's not just tobacco and marijuana and alcohol anymore. It's so many other things that keep us addicted in today's age. So it's a very interesting thing to go into, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'd like to hear from other students, because I think that your comment about how to teach it better, that's how you need to help us. You know, Boulat and I have had this conversation. We do this for the students because you teach us so much. And one of the things that I found in the US, and I'd love to hear if it would work internationally, is, as you say, you know, I would bring in a patient who usually was a very prominent person back in the day, you know, maybe in business or in sports, or someone that people looked up to, who they knew them, and they would talk about them, and then they would start talking about how they got addicted. And, you know, it wasn't just the Skid Row bum that we talk about here in the US. And there are a number of excellent addiction psychiatrists in Ireland who I've worked with up in Belfast and in Dublin. But I'd love to hear from other students on, and I really appreciate your sharing, you know, maybe personalizing it, having more patients come in, talk about it as a way to have the students, because you're going to be the teachers that matter. You're going to have to teach your patients' families, and your colleagues, who I can tell you will continue to have the prejudice, unfortunately. So you will be the important teachers at many different levels. And if you can help us teach you, then you'll help yourselves teach your colleagues moving forward.
I will go second. First of all, about chronic disease concept, I really found it interesting because, this is kind of chronic illness. We can see that it requires lifelong management. We should say, yes, you should quit this substance use, but you should go on like this in whole life, because you are like, in a way, more predisposed from all other people. So I think it will really help to make us understand, first as medical staff working in this area, we will understand it better. We will help better to our patients as even as a general practitioner, or I don't know, some other kind of specialist. Then we will see that it is a kind of chronic disease which really causes harms, like all the way, like in other things too. Yeah, this is a good one. And about learning and teaching about this, I think the problem here is that we are learning, as a medical student, I can see that we are learning about substance use, how we can do the treatment. But the problem is, yes, we are told that the awareness to understand these people is important. I mean, how we can manage it is important. But then we have exams to pass. And when it comes to that, they only ask us questions about, for example, how we can quit smoking, or which substance we use for quitting this substance. I don't know. Yeah, these are more like this oriented questions on it. So we just focus more on this, but we will not use it in our medical life later, because I will not treat these patients, I know. I will send them to psychiatry or public health or somewhere else to make them quit, but we really need to gain the awareness, the behavior to help them. But we are a bit weak on it, I guess, because we need to, yes, there is a huge burden in all the areas, all the departments. We are learning many things about like syndromes, everything, every little detail. But as a general practitioner or as a specialist on something, during my basic medical training, I want to learn more about how we can help these people as a general view, let's say. Yeah, this is a question to rise more in the future, I guess, because everything is getting heavier for us, but we should focus more on creating the awareness and how we can help these people as the other specialists. Because if I choose psychiatry later, I will learn how to treat them, but I will not know. If I do cardiology, for example, then I will not know. I will not say, okay, yeah, we learned some substances, some treatments during our medical life, but I don't know. I will not help you on this, and I don't really know if I need to send you somewhere or, yeah, I think there's a weakness on it in our
I think what you're saying is, as educators, we need to make sure that the student understands why this is relevant. How is this going to make me a better physician, regardless of what specialty I go into? Because the data shows that no matter what specialty you go into, and except maybe pathology, that this will play some impact. So we failed as educators to make the students say, hey, this isn't just facts to learn to pass the exam, but how is this relevant to make me a better physician, regardless of my specialty or if I'm in just general medicine? That's very important. Thank you.
And about other behavioral or internet use or other things, I guess our awareness is not quite well enough, because it is a new era, and it is a new domain that is coming to our lessons. Or they say now we have other addictions too. We are trying to teach it. We are learning about it. We are trying how to deal with it. But I can see that, yes, we are all addicted to our phones, our screens, but we are not really aware of it, and it is not really sad. I don't know. I don't know really what it is. I don't know even my teachers are aware of it.
Well, just to that point, think of a student or, who is so addicted to video games that they flunk out of school because they're not, or their social relationships, or someone who's got a sexual addiction who's looking at pornography. And these are documented cases in the literature, who's looking at, this actually became a much bigger issue during COVID worldwide. People going, 5, 6, 7 hours a day looking at pornography, when people were, in the home, they couldn't get out. So I think the point you made is a really good one, is to use clinical examples where the students can say, that is relevant for me. I could see a patient like that. And if I understand this, I'll be a better doctor. So I think and this is something Bülent and I have discussed for years, is how do we make education relevant for the students? Why should you bother learning anything about psychiatry if you're going to go into cardiology or you're going to go into surgery? And the reality is you'll be a better cardiologist and a better surgeon if you understand this. And maybe part of it is knowing when to refer, but what basic questions to ask. So I think you really shared a very important point that we need to do, is we as educators need to make it relevant for you as students, but then you as a physician need to make it relevant to the patient. Don't just tell them don't smoke, but I've got to die of something and I enjoy smoking. Why don't I smoke? And maybe I'll get hit by a truck when I walk outside today. So you hear all the rationalization. So what you need to do is exactly what we need to do as educators. How do we make this relevant for the patient? Because it's never just about knowledge. Knowledge doesn't change, but it's knowledge in the context of attitudes and behavior. So if I shouldn't use drugs, or that doesn't, it's what's your opinion about it, your attitudes, and then how does your knowledge and your attitude and opinion, how does that affect your behavior, whatever that behavior might be? So thank you. And I'd love to hear from your other colleagues.
Okay, so now we'll be talking about a chronic medical illness. So for me, before the psychiatric person, me, myself, I think most of the people maybe in Malaysia, they think as the drug addicts or addiction as the bad thing, is the bad guy. They are the bad behavior. But if we actually change their mindset to chronic medical illness, they will actually treat them as a patient, where they actually will care about them and they will not stay away from them. Because if they are bad guys, who will want to talk with them? Then they themselves will be even more difficult to treat. Yeah, they can't get help, all those. Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting thing to do. And the next one we have is for education. Personally, to be honest, in my medical school, talking about psychiatry, this substance use disorder, we only learn it in the lecture. We didn't even personally meet a patient with substance use disorder. What we actually meet is the only substance-induced psychosis. So it's quite difficult for me to say, for me to learn. But I think in medical school, the best way for us to learn is actually hand-on experience. That's for me. For myself, we actually have to meet the patient, maybe with a medical doctor, but this is difficult maybe due to privacy, right? So I think it's quite difficult for us also. That's my idea. Yeah, I think that's all. All right.
Thank you very much. But Doris, your thoughts?
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Those questions, Dr. Barry. I've actually taken a few notes, so I'll go through them. In terms of the chronic disease model, I think that's really interesting because usually we kind of, in medical school, face addiction as an acute issue. As you've said, seeing someone in ED that's come in after a night of drinking, and the whole, I guess, focus is around detoxing them and trying to discharge them ASAP, is sort of out of sight, out of mind, get out of my ED kind of idea. Whereas the chronic disease model emphasizes that it's not just about willpower, and kind of places emphasis on maybe the aspects of substance abuse that the patient has less control over, and kind of encourages a more empathetic and maybe more forgiving perspective on it. And I think it could really encourage support groups and communities as well. If you think about, Alcoholics Anonymous and things like that, it doesn't really present itself as the same sort of support group that a lot of other chronic diseases have. There's still a lot of stigma, for example, around Alcoholics Anonymous, and I think the chronic disease kind of approach would help with that. It also encourages more of a long-term kind of holistic care approach towards it. And if you think about chronic disease, there's one of the key aspects is around regular follow-up and monitoring. And I'm really not sure that we're currently providing that for patients that struggle with substance abuse. And that's definitely a place that we should invest more resources into, thinking about what structures are actually in place to provide that sort of chronic disease model follow-up for these patients. In terms of behavioral addictions, same with the other students, it's not really discussed in medical school. And maybe the views towards addiction is still very much leaning towards a biological view, so drugs that might have a reversal agent or that we're able to see on a blood test or treat in ED. And these kind of behavioral addictions possibly aren't seen as being as serious as the other ones, and possibly has its own sort of stigma within the realm of addictions. And I do think that we need more education on that. In terms of teaching, same with the other students. I think especially students that are interested in psychiatry were all captivated by stories. So there is a need to humanize it, not just talking about statistics, but making it more local and personal. That can be either through media resources or, a psychiatrist's own stories of the experiences of patients, inviting patients to come to symposiums, or even asking students to share their own stories. I remember in my own preclinical lectures, there was one time that one of my classmates actually stood up and started talking about her her own friends' experiences with addiction and how that really affected her. And I think that was just really, really powerful. And it kind of, that's what comes into your mind when you talk with a patient and when you face those sort of issues. And more education around social determinants, not just in the context of diabetes or heart disease, but in the context of mental illness as well. And in terms of addiction psychiatry, I think it's available in New Zealand and I'm interested in it. But at the same time, I feel that addiction psychiatry kind of underlies basically all the other subspecialties within psychiatry as well. So every psychiatrist needs to learn it well to some extent.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those excellent questions, Professor Barron. That's exactly the key point of this meeting. And thank you very much, all four of you, for the information. It's really, I've been taking notes as well. You highlighted very important things that Professor Barron summarized very well that we need to take on board to do this better. This teaching about addiction and helping medical students become physicians that can provide the necessary support to everyone that comes through the doors. Thank you very much. Professor Koskun, would you like to add some thoughts or have some questions for the students?
Well, thank you. Everything is going so well, except from the beginning. Anyway, our students, as Dave says, teach us always, and today it's the same again. As time comes to 90 minutes, we passed a bit over that. We will have to close it. But before closing, I would also like to underline, as Doris has mentioned just a few minutes ago, while discussing all these fundamental issues, we should also think about the students' own problems. All kinds of substance abuse or addictions. Well, David has underlined behavioral addictions as well. And maybe a solution I would like to suggest to those who might watch this recording, to have similar discussions at local schools, medical schools. Yeah. And I would like to ask our representatives of this group, medical students, to try to do their best in their own medical schools to have such discussions together with their friends, and also, as suggested again by our medical student participants, invite some people from the lay people, I mean, who have gone through similar problems. And I would like to thank all. Yatam has had to leave, and I would like to thank you, Rodrigo, Dave, Rojda, Kevin, Doris, and Yasmin, who are on my screen. Thank you all. Before closing, would anyone like to say a few words before we close?
Just a very short thing on my behalf. And I know it's just to repeat, thank you very much, and to highlight something you have said. We often talk about mental illness while teaching about them as if they existed outside of the room. Potentially one way of talking about them in a way that would highlight their presence, not just in potentially the majority or a lot of patients or people that come through our doors as physicians, is within the rooms itself. When we're talking about it, is something that might be present there. So it becomes not this distant, abstract thing that can be stigmatized, and it acquires this diabolical shape and that exists in the shadows, and instead it becomes a very present, everyday situation for a lot of people. And again, to just emphasize, thank you very much to all of you. It was a huge learning for me. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you all. We're going to close the YouTube stream now.